Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into human behavior. We're going to look at what psychology actually says about one of the most complex, beautiful, and honestly, often neglected parts of our lives. I want to set a highly reflective, serious tone right from the very first word today because we're exploring something huge. We're looking at why we take the absolute most important people in our lives for granted and why we often only truly value them when it's just too late. Okay, let's dive into this. Give yourself an honest answer right now, like a really honest one. When was the last time you called your mom or your dad, not because you needed a favor and not because you just had a quick update about your day, but simply to ask how they are feeling? If you're kind of struggling to remember, hey, you're not alone. And as we'll see, there is an actual psychological mechanism behind this forgetfulness. So let's start with an ordinary story about Abu Faisal from Riyadh to really anchor our analysis today. Abu Faisal is going to be our human anchor. He's a 72-year-old man who, like so many parents out there, sacrificed his absolute peak years working tirelessly for his family, literally without a single complaint. Every single day of his adult life meant waking up early, working hard, coming home totally exhausted, and yet still finding the energy to smile for his kids. So Abu Faisal successfully raised 3 sons. But as they grew up, the family naturally fragmented. We've got Faisal, the eldest, who is super busy running his own business. Then there's Omar, the middle child, who moved away and settled down in a completely different city. And finally, Hamad, the youngest, newly married and completely absorbed in building his fresh new life. The sons are busy. They're aggressively pursuing their own dreams, which, as you can imagine, leaves a massive void in their father's life. And this leads us to a pretty stark daily reality. Abu Faisal was alone at home every single day. I really want you to feel the emotional weight of a parent left behind here. I mean, he gave his best years to surround his kids with warmth, and his reward in his twilight years is just a quiet, empty house. But listen, this isn't just a story about one man in Riyadh. This exact reality is unfolding in countless homes right now, maybe even yours. Moving on to the big question, why don't we value them? The psychological trap. We literally have to halt the story right here and just ask, why? Why do we ignore them? Well, it all comes down to a psychological trap. Why do perfectly decent people, like Abu Faisal's sons, who aren't malicious by any means, act this way? It's not just about being busy, it's an actual psychological blind spot. So let's shift gears for a second and look at the science of our minds to figure this out. Now, what's really interesting about this is a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. In psychology, this explains how our brains literally adapt to the constant presence of something or someone, and we just begin taking it for granted. Because parents are always there, the brain simply labels their presence and their massive sacrifices as normal rather than exceptional. This totally removes the villain label from Abu Faisal's sons. They aren't evil. Their brains simply adapted to their father's unconditional love until it became practically invisible to them. Just think back for a quick second. When you were sick in childhood, who stayed awake all night with you? Your mom, your dad. They sacrificed their sleep, their comfort, their peace of mind. But do you actively remember and appreciate that today? Probably not. Because to your developing brain back then, that extreme level of care was just the normal baseline of your existence. Hedonic adaptation literally erased the exceptional nature of their sacrifice. Which brings us to the fear of loss, the heart attack and the hospital. What happens when that constant presence is suddenly threatened? The quiet routine of Abu Faisal's isolation was suddenly shattered by a massive heart attack. He was rushed straight to the emergency room, plunging the entire family into a really tense, dramatic crisis. But look at how these busy sons initially reacted to this. Faisal managed a single hurried visit before rushing right back to work. Umar, he merely sent a text message hoping his dad would get well soon without actually showing up. And Hamad visited briefly, but spent his time sitting in the hospital room just checking his phone before leaving. Contrast this painfully inadequate reaction with a total stranger, a nurse, who actually sat by Abu Faisal's side, held his hand, and offered him genuine human comfort. It was absolutely only when the doctors came out and announced that Abu Faisal's condition was incredibly critical that the son's behavior shifted. Suddenly, all three were standing in the hospital corridor together, in tears. And this brings us to another fascinating psychological concept: anticipatory grief. This is when we suddenly realize the profound value of someone only because we are faced with the immediate threat and fear of losing them. The threat of loss literally pierced right through their hedonic adaptation. But the real tragedy of reactive emotions is that they're so temporary. Once Abu Faisal miraculously recovered and was allowed to return home, what happened? The sons instantly reverted to their old routines. Faisal went back to his business, Umar to his distant city, and Hamad to his new life. Abu Faisal was once again completely alone. Anticipatory grief only works when the threat is active, you know? It simply doesn't build lasting appreciation. So how do we break this cycle? Let's look at the science of relationships and happiness, specifically the Harvard study. We're turning to the empirical data here. There is an actual scientific solution to this psychological dilemma, and it requires fundamentally shifting how we approach our bonds with our parents and our loved ones. So the crucial point is this: we absolutely have to move from anticipatory grief, which is entirely reactive, literally waiting for a tragedy to show we care, and shift towards proactive love. Proactive love means giving time, assigning value, and showing appreciation beforehand. Doing it deliberately, every single day, without needing some massive crisis to prompt you. And we know this works for sure because of the most comprehensive research ever conducted on the subject. Harvard University ran a study tracking human life, joy, and well-being. And get this, they ran it for a monumental span of 80 years. They observed what actually makes a human life fulfilling. It's so long that it literally outlived its original researchers. It required multiple generations of scientists just to track all the data. And the Harvard study's ultimate undeniable finding is profound. Strong relationships equal happiness, health, and a long life. Proactive love isn't just a nice moral thing to do for your parents, right? It is the literal, scientifically proven key to your own health and longevity. Building strong, active relationships is basically the ultimate life hack for human happiness. Let's bring this all back to Riyadh with a hard truth. Time never comes back. At the dinner table, Abu Faisal, having survived his brush with death and deeply understanding the silent ticking of the clock, decided to just take matters into his own hands. He called all three of his busy sons and asked them to come over and sit down with him at the dinner table, together. Looking right at his three boys, Abu Faisal asked them a really piercing question. He said, "I know you're busy, but I want to ask you one thing. When was the last time you talked to me? Just to me?" Faisal thought about it, Omar thought about it, Hamad thought about it. The silence in that room was absolutely deafening. There was no answer. And this brilliantly illustrates the sudden, silent realization that hit those sons. Abu Faisal didn't yell, he didn't guilt-trip them. He just gently reminded them that he was still here, right now, but that time never, ever comes back. That gentle, proactive reminder broke right through their hedonic adaptation. That night, the sons stayed. They ate together, they laughed, they talked. And for the first time in a very long time, Abu Faisal went to bed with a completely full heart. So I want to leave you with this final thought. and I want you to really let it sink in. Call them today. Ask them how they are doing, and just listen. Practice proactive love right now, before the day comes when the phone simply stops ringing and the silence becomes permanent. Because the pain of that silence, well, no psychology in the world can explain that away.